thinking about things like who will be at your Seder. Will there be more people who are traditional or liberal? So when you're picking out Haggadah, do you want to really keep that in mind? How knowledgeable your guests are, things, whether it's your Haggadah is egalitarian and the gender language in it, and keeping in mind any Jewish, non-Jewish guests and how, there's a big range of Haggadahs and how they really focus. So there's Haggadahs, one of them, which is the one by Marcia Falk, has a very feminist perspective, The Night of Beginnings, and it's beautiful. And if you haven't seen it, and I'm going to show a little bit of it in the future, there's abbreviated Haggadot, and there's ones with social justice, different commentary, and there's beautiful ones with art, and I'm going to show you one of those. Consider having each person at the Seder have their own Haggadah, and you could have a simple Haggadah and then more complicated ones, or you could just have each person do a different Haggadah. What's missing in your Haggadah? Do you want to have additional readings? Looking for questions. I'm going to give you a resource, and a lot of Haggadahs actually have questions in them. What are the theme or themes to your Seder? How to involve children who attend it? How long should it last? What needs to be explained? And depending each year on who's invited and what you want to do, there's such a range in how this can be handled. So I'm a foodie. So one of the things I do is I look at cookbooks. And the one on the far right is the New York Times Passover cookbook. Turns out it's been redone, but I don't think they've changed anything in it. And I love this dessert on the left, which a lot of times doing desserts are so complicated, but that's just a little something that I thought looked yummy. If you aren't familiar with Marcy Goldman, she has a website, and this I printed out here. My trademark is my most requested, absolutely magnificent caramel matzah crunch. So both of these are actually, the cookbook on the right is the old one that I have, and then the one on the left is actually the new one. That's a new edition of it, a 10th anniversary issue. Cooking with children makes them part of it ahead of time. My kids always love to make haroset, but this book called The Children's Jewish Holiday Kitchen had this recipe for vegetable and fruit kugel cupcakes. They're really basically with sweet potato and carrots, and I wouldn't call them cupcakes, but it's just a really nice way to include children in the process because it's a long process. If you're not familiar with Leona Green, she's a local author, and there are daughters on the cover. She includes a lot of things about foremothers in our history and language. There's very explicit directions, which is very helpful. There's also an abbreviated version, and that is in gray, that is very clear. And I included just one of the simple fun songs here, which is sung to Someone's in the Kitchen with Dinah. Someone's in the palace with Pharaoh. And I know there's all kinds of websites that do this too. But I just want, even though it's traditional, she really has a very uplifting, fun element to this. And I actually own many copies and have used it a number of years. This is just one that I found, and I just thought was very fun, and it would be fun to give to a teenager or someone who just likes visuals. And this came out in 2019. And it's actually designed by a cartoonist, but it was the comic book artist is actually from Jerusalem, Israel. I looked up all kinds of links for child-friendly seders, and that's one of the handouts. So there's all kinds of things like adding masks or adding little toys, or instead of having a regular afikoman, having an afikoman scavenger hunt. And there's just, anyway, this is a good opportunity. And the Haggadah that I have here is it's an older one, but I loved it because it has hidden, it is basically a look and find Haggadah, which I just thought was really good for like an older elementary or someone. So it has both the Haggadah, but it also has pictures. This is The Night of Beginnings by Marcia Falk. It's absolutely staggeringly beautiful. What I have here is one of the poems that is written, and this just came out very recently. And so I cannot, actually it came out last year. And I couldn't not include it. So if you haven't seen it, it's a wonderful, wonderful resource. This is a Haggadah that I recently picked up, like in the last few years, by Tablet Magazine. And it has a lot of fun visuals in it. And it's kind of combines kind of traditional and more kind of modern elements. And it was important that I include it. The one on the left, if you like Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, his Haggadah has both a full Haggadah, but it also has a collection of essays. So on one side of the book is all these essays, on the other side is the Haggadah. And I just purchased the one on the right, Out of the Narrows, the artist's Haggadah. It's by the Jewish Art Collective of Chicago. And the art in it is just absolutely outstandingly beautiful. You just want to sit there and look at that. And it, of course, it has all the text, but if you just get a chance to look at this, it is just one of the most lovely Haggadahs I've looked at. These are two books that if you really want to explore elements of the Haggadah and the Seder, the one I got on the right, the Telling Workbook, is very simple and pared down. It basically has little pieces from the actual book, and then it has on the right-hand side, it has questions and ways to really questions you might use in the Seder, or elements you might explore for themes. So some of the things that are noted in the workbook are Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik said that everything holy involves preparation. There are weeks of preparation, intellectual, spiritual, and practical. And that's, I mean, a good Seder involves preparation and time, both individually for ourselves, but also for the actual Seder. Elie Wiesel said when he created man, God gave him a secret, and that secret was not to begin, but how to begin again. And that's what Passover does every year, or Pesach. It gives us a chance to begin again. What do you want to do to begin again in the coming year? So that would be like a typical question that they would ask in the Telling Workbook. Isn't Rosh Hashanah the new year? Well, Rosh Hashanah is not in the Torah. This new year is about, Pesach is about community, about peoplehood. It is thus a new year for relationship with ourselves and others. So there's a big focus on Rosh Hashanah being the new year, but that was something that I knew, but Mark Yerson does such an amazing job. And if you wanted to go into great depth, you would get the book, The Telling. But the workbook, which just came out last year, just came out very recently. So that's the end. Let's see. So I haven't been tracking my time.
You're right about on time. Very good.
I'm so happy.
Yeah.
So anyway, I hope perhaps I showed you a few things that you weren't aware of. And I am always happy to talk about preparing for Seder if you want to either call me or email me.
Leah. Oh, you're still muted, Leah.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to tell Audrey that this was an amazing presentation.
Thank you.
A lot of information and very well put together. Thank you.
I appreciate that. I did try and have a range there for one and all.
I like that you
I
included
agree. Thank you
cookbook.
very much, Audrey. It was wonderful.
Yeah, and you included cookbooks, which is another little twist, which is good too. Thank you.
And there is a list of every book I mentioned. So all the websites, there's 2 different lists.
I would like to mention 2 recipes that are in the Kol HaLev cookbook.
Okay.
One is for a kugel pudding that, contrary to expectations, is very light and fluffy and delicious.
Oh,
And the other one is for a chocolate dessert that has no dairy and no flour, which makes it perfect for Pesach and perfect for a kosher dinner because there is no butter in it
Thank you.
or any dairy.
I just want to add one other little thing. Audrey, the pear dessert recipe you recommended is by Joan Text, who was a Cleveland Jewish
Right.
food writer for decades and a friend of our family. So I just mentioned she was a Clevelander.
Thank you. Thank you.
made it in the big time, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's move on. Let's Judy, you were going to be next.
Okay, thank you. Well, as Audrey pointed out, the world has thousands and thousands of Haggadahs, and the last thing we probably need is another one. But I do a different one every year. And some of the principles behind, and it's all cut and paste. I am not writing a Haggadah. I am just putting together a Haggadah. It started because when my kids were sort of middle school age in day school, I wanted to change the Seder. I was getting kind of bored, and I suggested to the kids and my mother, who was always with us for Pesach, that we would do it. The kids said no. My mother said yes. I'm so bored with it. And so we changed it. So it started just adding readings and grew to this completely different Haggadah every year. But it starts kind of in the same place Audrey starts with. Know your group. Mine is basically the same group. It's family. So the family has gotten bigger over the years, and people have married in, and there are friends who have been with us for Pesach since the beginning. And I don't spend any time talking about what Pesach is or the things that you would have to talk about if you had people who were not familiar with Jewish tradition or with the Seder. If they've come into the family and they're not Jewish, which we have, I assume the spouse will prepare them. And it has always worked that way. And until very recently, we had no kids. So no little kids. So that allowed us to do different things. And now I'm kind of at a loss because now I have these little kids. So the first thing is really to decide just how innovative you want to be. You might substitute new readings for some of the readings in the Haggadah. And that's how I started out. So instead of when we would get to matzah, we would have a poem about matzah. Then the next year, a different poem about matzah. And the next year, a different reading about matzah. Kind of with everything. I must have a dozen different readings on karpas and, maybe 20 on oranges on the Seder plate. So when we first started, I would make copies of them and number them and put them in an envelope and have everyone draw one as they came in. Because otherwise, if you're sitting at a big table and you ask for a volunteer, some people always volunteer, some people never volunteer. If they've pulled an envelope and it just says number 1, they can, or 7, they can open their envelope, look at it in advance if they're a little worried about speaking in public. And then when it comes to 7, they just do their piece, and that way everybody is included and everybody has a part. One way to determine where you want to add readings or where you want to do substitutions is to look at the order of the Seder that we sing at the beginning, and let that be your guide to your major sections and where you want to do it. Then there is also a matter of choreography or stagecraft. I like to start with a silly song that everyone can sing. A silly, loud song ends all the side conversations at your table. It gets everyone involved immediately, and when it's over, everyone is quiet at the same time. So you're ready to really begin without having to shush people or wait, which you really don't want to have to do. So songs like Take Us Out of Egypt, to Take Me Out to the Ball Game, or any of the My Fair Lady songs. There is a whole My Fair Lady Seder you can do. There are Beatles songs, anything that most people know the melody to will, and that's very upbeat, will work that way. We always do a new song every year, and then we always do It's Time to Flee This Country to the Muppet song, because my kids wrote it. So we do that. And I kind of, throughout the Seder, as we do serious readings, then I like to break them with a song, especially a fun song, like, or a fun reading. Like, we do the 4 questions, of course, and we do them in Hebrew. Both my grandchildren can do them in Hebrew, even the 4-year-old. But there's also the Dr. Seuss 4 questions, which are fun. And the kids really like that, instead of just have the kids do it in Hebrew, and then people in English read the Dr. Seuss translation, which is kind of a fun way. Or instead of doing the 4 children, well, we do a different kind of 4 children every year, but there is the Ballad of the 4 Sons, which you sing to Clementine, which many people know. And then there must be a dozen readings on the 4 daughters or the 4 children. And so you're not doing the same one every year. So we always do that. And I've also kind of rearranged things. So towards the first part, after the candles and the order of the Seder and the Kiddush and all that, I do the whole Seder plate. We explain everything on the Seder plate. And again, with a different reading or explanation. Some of them are maybe fairly long, like Marge Piercy has a wonderful poem about the orange. And we have an orange on our Seder plate, and we have another oranges that we've cut into sections. And after we talk about the orange on the Seder plate, we say the blessing, Borei Peri Ha'etz, and we pass around oranges. So everybody eats a snack of an orange, just like they get the parsley in salt water. So clearly the length of time of my Seder is a problem, or it runs long, but you can always make it any way you like. And also I do Miriam's cup at the front with the Seder plate, because by just somehow just putting her cup with Eliyahu's cup seemed to take like oh yeah, let's not forget the ladies. So I wanted it to be a more standalone, an important part of the explanation of the symbols on the table. So I put it there. obviously I have to eliminate some things. And so I usually eliminate like the whole righteous anger part. Although one year we did that as a discussion and it worked great because we really focused on what it means to be angry and that there is such a thing as righteous anger and how that can be used positively. And I usually skip like the mirror, the hands of God, the fingers of God, and it slows things down, and we're going for hours anyhow. The heart of our Seder, of my Seder, has always been the discussion. And with Rabbi Steve, he has been just fantastic in helping me every year come up with a discussion topic that really involves everyone at the Seder. Again, not little kids, but everyone else. And I particularly have been working to find questions that everybody can be involved in, regardless of their Jewish level of practice or knowledge. And typically that it has relevance to the topics of the day. So let me just give you a few for instances, and if you want more, I could talk about this forever, but let me know. One of the most successful discussions we had was, I asked everyone, and I send this out in advance. I send emails out in advance. Ask everyone to bring, if they could add one thing to the Seder plate, what would it be? And to bring it, if at all possible. And then I had a whole thing about the Seder plate and what each thing was and what united them. And, so they would have some context of figuring out what to bring. We had at our house in Cleveland that year, 23 people, adults. I was really worried that we were going to have a lot of duplications. We did not have one duplication. Everybody brought something different. And of course, presented their item, and it was fantastic. It was really a wonderful discussion for the Seder. Another one, kind of a little more intellectual, but it really worked well, was the question of, is Pharaoh or was Pharaoh evil? And in advance, I sent out a discussion and some information, like a whole bunch of definitions of evil from Freud and from St. Augustine. And I must have had 4 or 5. And then the question, is Pharaoh evil? And people had to, we could talk about that. And we have one of the people who always comes is an attorney who does some death penalty work on the federal level. And so, we were all saying, have you met anyone really evil? How would you define really evil? So that added an interesting dimension. Another very successful one was the Shifra and Pua Awards. So if you could nominate someone for the Shifra Pua Award, who would you nominate and why? And again, I have to do it in advance. I give them a who Shifra and Pua were, just in case they forgot or they don't know too much about it. And who would you nominate and why? And again, we didn't have 23 people that time. We had a lot of people, but there were a lot of different nominees. And again, it doesn't really take a lot of observant background to be able to be actively engaged in a question like that. One that was probably the most fun, it was an election year, and we had an election of who should take the Israelites out of Egypt, who should be the leader. That one was more complicated because we had to have campaign managers. So we did. We got 3 people who volunteered. One was for Moses, one was for Aaron, and one was for Miriam. We had slogans for each. Moses' slogan was "Vote for me." God did. Aaron's was Aaron, a leader who listens, and a silvery-tongued spokesman for the people. And for Miriam, it was experienced, pragmatic, and musical. And we even had songs, that some of them had songs for their candidates. And we had a write-in candidate, which was Pharaoh, who, when it was his turn, he told the people, you're going to miss the onions of Egypt. You're going to miss it. You're going into this horrible unknown. So, and then we voted and Aaron won. So that was a more complex one, but it was 2016. So it was really a lot of fun. They don't have to be that complex. One year we asked everyone to bring something that symbolized freedom and something that symbolized oppression. And what was interesting was that most often the items were the same. A clock, a checkbook, a mortgage, and then each one explained it, and car keys. So that one really worked very well. And it can be really simple and just ask everyone to bring a reading on freedom. And there'll be many, many different ones, some Jewish, some not, some, Civil War or civil rights oriented, and many things. So that's, I'll show you some of my, do I still have time? Because I didn't.
5 minutes.
Oh, okay. So I'll tell you the story of this one. I don't know if you can see it. It says that it was a pandemic Pesach, and it says, we'll get through this. So that was one of the that we did. I usually had them spiral bound like this, but I think if I were going to do this again, I would do it in plastic sheets, so I don't have to run off so many copies of so many pages every year, because some you do. I do all the songs and the birkat, because we do the long birkat in a separate book, so that, again, so I don't have to run it every year, because it's just too much printing. And I'll tell you a story about this cover. This says, the Egyptian gods versus one little goat. When my mother was alive, we would do the Hadgadya, and everybody had to make the sound. They were assigned sounds. Somebody was the goat, somebody was, each of the things, the shofet and the fire and the stick and all of those things. And my mother was always the goat. And she always made these ridiculous sounds that just sent us all into roaring laughter. And then after my mother passed away, in fact, and we had that Seder of what would you bring to the Seder plate, my brother found a little plastic goat and made that his item to go on our Seder plate. And so this is the cover from a following year. All the gods of Egypt were versus one tiny little goat. And that was the cover. So, and I usually have a couple of cartoons that I put in. Again, it's all cut and paste, so it's not a beautiful Haggadah, but it's a fun one. Thank you.
Any questions or comments? Yeah, Leah.
Again, Judy, this is amazing. How creative your seders are. It's totally amazing. I would like to know the 23 people that came and brought something. What did they bring?
I won't remember everything, but I'll tell you what I remember. Bittersweet chocolate, because everything in the Seder has both bitterness and sweetness. The bitterness of slavery, on and on, the sweetness of freedom. One who had been a nursery school teacher brought a bag of crumbled up matzah crumbs, so that our people who have lost their way will follow the crumbs back to Jewish observance. A beet for a heart, What were some of the other things? A tomato, because that's when there were the strikes going on in California about the tomato workers and the picking tomatoes, and talking about that was the slavery was still in existence then. What were some of the other things? Okay, I have them written down, but unfortunately, I'm in Washington and I have file drawers of this stuff in Cleveland, and I don't have all my reference stuff here. But I'm trying to think of what were the others. I don't know. I'll have to look it up.
Judy, while you're thinking for a minute, I'm just going to share screen some covers of your other ones, which I don't know if they were easily to see. So let's see, because I put them together. So those are some of her other covers. And the other one, the one little picture on the bottom is just a picture, and it's really cute.
It is.
It's
Who
always
drew?
the last page.
Yeah.
Oh, is it? Who drew that?
I don't know. I copied it out of the Haggadah. It's in one of the Haggadahs.
Because it's so perfect. The slumping.
And
Yeah.
I always use a quote too, or something that's always at the end. And also we always end by singing not only Hatikva, but America the Beautiful. And because my brother and his family are from Toronto, we also sing "Oh Canada." So we end with a song too. And there's a quote, which I don't have here, I don't think, from Henny Youngman that says, "I always wanted to be an atheist, but I gave it up because they have no holidays."
Yeah.
Because they
All
have
right.
no what?
Yeah,
No
Barb, you had a question?
When I was hosting Seders, I would include a freedom plate and ask people to bring objects. And we would have car keys and Audrey, you'll appreciate this, a library card.
Okay,
Nice.
thank you. I just want a quick question. What's the Schifrin thing? Schifrin Prize?
Oh, Shifra and Pua were
Award.
the midwives.
Shifra. Okay, I don't know what, those are who?
The midwives who
Oh,
disobeyed
okay.
Pharaoh,
Okay.
and
Yeah,
yeah, I
yeah.
should have explained it, but they disobeyed Pharaoh and they wouldn't kill the babies.
Right, right.
Pharaoh called them in front of him and he chastised them, and they made up some story about, they just deliver too fast. So it's people who kind of ordinary people put in an extraordinary circumstance, who act in a particularly brave
I see.
or
Yeah,
way.
very cool. Thank you.
And it's often cited as the first recorded instance of passive resistance.
Oh, very good.
Or civil
Move
disobedience.
on to, we should move on to Mark. We give everybody a fair shot here.
All right, well, Audrey and Judy said everything I was going to say, so we can just cut it early tonight, and I'll leave it there. I'm just wondering, like, if we can have a show of hands, people just wave, like, how many people are primarily here tonight looking to enhance a Seder that's primarily comprised of adults? And how many people are looking like to involve, let's say, kids or elementary school kids?
No.
Okay, so there's no clear thing. All right, well, I'll just try to go through a lot of what I have, but do it fast, and try not to repeat too much what other people have said. Yeah, for myself, I think it's important, and I think this has come across already. It's important to have a leader or a master of ceremonies who has an overview of the whole Haggadah and what the steps are that you're going to be going through. And that person kind of is the main person. It's probably be all of you who are watching right now at your own home, but you're in charge and you're keeping the trains running, so to speak, and keeping everyone engaged and on time. But many people go to Seders like this, and I don't know if anyone does this anymore, but don't have a single voice leading the Seder. Don't just have the oldest uncle in the room read the Haggadah from cover to cover while everyone sits in silence. Many people think that's the only way to do it. That is not a requirement in the least. If you have an uncle like that, well, then you have a issue on your hands, I think, that you have to work with. But and then engages, needs conversation and subtlety. But anyway, I forgot. I wanted to start this by saying that I wanted to do this in honor of my in-laws, Sam Kelman of blessed memory, and Anna Kelman. When I first started coming into Judaism, Passover was the first big holiday that Adina brought me to, and where I really started to get to know the family. And I don't, if you have been to Anna or Sam's Seder, you know what it was like. If you haven't, you could probably imagine if you knew Sam at all. Sam would be sitting there usually with a pipe in the early days and a cloud of smoke around his head, and a stack literally of 13 to 20 books, every one of which he was going to reference at some point during the Seder, all of which he had looked through for 3 or 4 months before. And so I always remember as I was considering converting, and then I did convert, to me, like leading a Seder, that was like the epitome. It was like leading high holiday services, something like that. It just, it seemed so overwhelming to me and something that I would never really be able to do. And then I would look at my mother-in-law, Anna, and think about what she had gone through and what her entire family had gone through in the Warsaw Ghetto and surviving the Nazis. And I always said that, to Adina and her family, that I felt I wasn't just marrying a girl that I was in love with. I was somehow marrying actual living Jewish history right in the room. And that the biggest concerns our people had on a cultural and a political level were being played out in the lives of the people right in the room, and the extended families in Israel and around the country. Me personally, the Seder really clicked probably the second or third one I went to. I was working in politics full time at the time, and I started looking at the whole thing through the lens of these people being political actors, and what were the choices they were making, and what were the compromises they were making along the way. And there's nothing specific I can remember from that day, but for the first time, I felt I could add something to the conversation based on my real life experience of working for change and working for freedom, and that I had something to bring to the table. So I think this point's been made by Audrey and Judy, but I think it's very important to tie it to the Seder in general, to tie to what's going on in the world today and what's going on to the Jewish people today, but also to try to tie to your own life and your family's life and what's important to you. I do an outline myself based on the Kadesh Urchatz song at the beginning, and leave big spaces under each heading for things I want to put in and what page number I want to go to. But the main thing to remember is Magid has about like 20 subsections to it, right? The telling of the story has one title in the Haggadah, but it goes on for many pages, and that's usually the bulk of what happens. Similar to, and I love the kind of questions you gave people to answer, Judy, to bring an answer or bring an object for your Seder. Just a little twist how we do it is either we know what people are into in their personal life. Like a friend of ours did a lot of work with refugees, and we asked her, hey, would you like to bring something to tie this to the refugee crisis today? She was overjoyed to do that, right? I mean, she brought a whole Haggadah, which we weren't going to use in the end, but she highlighted various parts of it. I put in my notes here, like, do you have ask one of your older relatives what's their favorite part of the Haggadah? Ask them to bring a memory, a story, or a commentary that they can share on that part. If you have someone who's really outdoorsy and is out there hiking all the time or knows a lot about nature, ask them to bring something for Karpas, right? For the new signs of spring, right? Like has already been said, unless you feel halachically required to, you don't necessarily have to read every single part of the Haggadah. And I think, yes, the things about God's hand and the number of plagues, going from 10 to 500, those can get very complicated. And to me, always, if you're going to read those, you have to start to explain them to people or ask people what they know about them. Or you have to know something about them, I think, to add and help people understand why they're reading things or why they're all of a sudden reading about a wandering Aramean. But if you feel like many people, if they don't hear the line or two about the wandering Aramean, it's not going to be a Seder to them. So if it's going to be there, help explain it to people or ask your guest to help explain it as well. In our families over time, our amount and willingness and interest in singing has gone up and down over the years. Some years Chip was our guitarist. I know Chip's out there watching tonight. Chip would be our guitarist, and that made it really fun because most of us don't see ourselves as song leaders. So around this issue, I say go with your strengths. If you are a song leader and you like leading, lead a lot of songs. If you're not, ask a friend or a family member who's there to really help out in that part. And me personally, I don't feel you have to read every line of Haggadah. Again, if you want, it's great, but I don't think you have to. But some people are going to feel like the Seder, they're going to be deeply disappointed. So you have to weigh that out yourself. But I think the content of Haggadah is very, very interesting. But, I don't think you have to sing every single one of them. I think I've been doing a lot in recent years, ever since I worked at the Maltz Museum, is to bring visual imagery in and either find images online tied to the Seder or from the Haggadot that I work with, and just have people look at the images and take them as commentaries on Haggadah. And if I can find a couple of them real quick here. First, I was going to do this at the end, but I'm doing it now. Nobody brought this one up yet. I don't know if anyone remembers or knows this one. At one point, this was people are nodding. This was the new Reconstructionist Haggadah. When I remember the days in the Reconstructionist movement, there was only, I think, a bencher, right, and a Friday night service book, I think, were the only official prayer books the movement had. And then there was this explosion of everything and this came along with it. So the new Reconstructionist Haggadah is now 26 years old, I think. So, which kind of blows my mind. 1999, 24 years old. In some ways, the imagery is a little dated. It's the early days of using pixelated computer blown up images. I don't know how well people could see that or not, but I think that adds a certain it adds a kind of hip, new digital overlay to the art and makes it seem contemporary, I think, particularly for younger people. But there's just some great imagery in here that you can use. And a favorite thing I have often used, Audrey mentioned Noam Zion's book, A Different Night. That's my absolute favorite Haggadah of all time. And I think you could really just buy this one too, and you could use it for the rest of your life. There's so much in it on every single line of the text, of the traditional text. And he does both. He uses all the traditional text is in there, all the blessings are in here, but it's also extremely contemporary from both an Israeli and an American perspective. And it admits to all the problems in the text and admits to the issues that we all have when we read it. So that's part of why I love it. I should have done this before and marked the page. I apologize. But I'm trying to find the part on the 4 sons or the 4 children. Right here. And I don't know if you'll be able to see this or not. Can anyone see those pictures?
Yes.
See, so you have like the yeshiva, Hebrew, what do you call it? Yeshiva University modern Orthodox girl with her hair tied up in a bun and a cell phone and a briefcase, looking like she's going off, to law school or to court, right? So every Jewish parent's dream, right? The rebellious daughter is a left-wing, probably feminist, radical. But if you may notice, every single thing that she's asking for are things that are in the Haggadah and things that Judaism requires of us. They're probably taking a cheap shot here at New Age Jews, let's say, or Jew-boos, right? With the levitating, meditating, who perhaps does not know how to ask, but are simplistic in her appropriations. I think this was around the time when Madonna was the global spokesperson for Kabbalah, if you might remember, and raised a lot of controversy. And again, a kind of hipster kid with, a mohawk and a lot of electronic items watching TV, right? The kid who doesn't know how to ask. And there's all kinds of pictures like that. Here's the Marx Brothers, the various Marx Brothers dressed up as wise children and wicked children. And where's my favorite? Is it in here? Well, this is one of my favorites too. If you can tell from the colors, every one of the children has elements of themselves that belong to the other children, right? The wise people have a wicked, rebellious streak. The rebellious ones want to be wise, etc. So there's just a bunch of images out there. But one of my favorites, I couldn't find it in time tonight, is from, that doesn't matter now. I'm going to forget his name, so I won't do it now. But, but this makes it concrete. I'll just describe it. It was an artist in the 30s from Germany, and the wise and wicked children were all people from contemporary 1930s Germany, like an ultra-modernist, secular, I don't want to hear about any of this, no goodness.
Arthur Zick.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you. I always forget his name. The wicked child is like Hitler, he just puts it right in there because things were happening already there. So I love that kind of stuff. But just putting an image out there of Miriam, right, and Miriam's cup, or of a slave trying to haul a block up a pyramid. There's just a lot of great images out there, and asking people what they see and how they react and how they feel about an image can very often get to feelings and insights that don't come through words. I'm a very wordy person, and I love doing a lot of readings from the various Haggadot I have. But I found that using imagery more and more over the years has been really refreshing and helped people think about things in a new way. The parents are ultimately supposed to be the storytellers during the Seder, and they're supposed to tell the story, and many of us know it and could tell it, but you only have so much time. And some people, I think the idea was that we were like in the old days, the Exodus was so embedded in our consciousness that we could retell the whole story in real time. It was as it was happening, with the miracles and the death and destruction. And a lot of those things make us uncomfortable sometimes today. So I don't mind diving into those things, but it can make us uncomfortable. And it's good to just sometimes tell the story from your own perspective and what you remember and what happened in the Bible. The interesting thing is that the story of the Exodus isn't told in many places in the Haggadah, what actually happened. So what I'm going to do here is I always say do things traditionally. So the parents are supposed to explain it. And I think it's good for parents to lead and show their kids that they know things. But something that Anna and Sam used to always do is unfairly maybe put Adina and her brother Ari on the spot and make them in real time in front of all the guests tell the story of the Exodus. in order correctly to see what they had learned, you know? But what these usually drew into every year were free-for-alls because everyone was remembering elements of the story at different times and places, and why, you know, the causality of certain events might have been mixed up or misplaced, let's say. So just the simple retelling of the story in Shemot can be very powerful, I think, and can help make the rest of the Haggadah make sense. I only have a few more minutes left, so let me fly through this. Yeah, like for the four sons, some of the questions, or four children, the questions I've had for discussion over the years are, is there one of the children that you've always identified with, and why? If you're willing to say why that is, you know, most people I know in Kol HaLev aren't so shy about that. But or on the other hand, have you changed? Have you been a different child at different stages in your life? Was there a time where you were just wicked and rebellious? You wanted nothing to do with what was going on, and can you remember that and bring it back to memory, and why you were that way, and perhaps why you're here today if you were so rebellious in the past? You know, I know for myself, certainly, I mean, I was the child who did not know how to ask at the beginning, and I would sit there in silence for the vast majority of the Seder. Whatever, I felt compelled to get a master's degree in this stuff eventually, and now I feel at least sometimes like I have some wisdom that I can share. Another question: do you feel trapped in your role? Did your family, and this could get touchy, you have to know your family, but were some of you in your sibs one of those children, and are you always going to be that child? And does the family or your friends hold you and always expect you to be a certain one of those children? And would you prefer maybe sometimes not to have the answer, not to always be the wise kid, or not to always be the rebellious one who's kicking up dust? I like this one too. What's a wise kid and a rebellious kid today in our kind of Jewish communities? And what was a wise and rebellious kid when we were growing up, or when our parents were growing up? And has that changed or not over time? I always like Dayenu, and Dayenu I think is a pretty interesting song. Again, I don't think you have to sing every line of it, but Dayenu goes through like every miracle in the Exodus story and says, you know, if only that happened, it would have been enough. We could have died happy. We could have ended right there. The story could have ended right there. You know, wouldn't that have been great? But then there's this hierarchy, right? That just keeps more and more and more things happen. And so I've asked the question some years, is there some point on that list where it would have been good enough for you? Would the freedom have been enough? Or would you have, you know, because after the freedom eventually comes the giving of the Torah, there's new rules, right? There's new rules imposed, right? That supposedly that we buy into as part of the covenant. You know, it ends with, and you know, this is very, you know, touchy today, but I think the last line of the Torah is being brought, of Dayenu is being brought into the land of Israel. Is that something that we look to these days? Is that a value? Is that the penultimate, or can a Jewish life be lived just as vibrantly here in diaspora as there? That was always a huge theme for Sam, right? I mean, there were a lot of contemporary Israel was constantly referenced in his seders, because that's where his head was. That's what really concerned him, and where I think a lot of these things were playing out. So he was always tying it back to what's going on in Israel. Another thing I've liked over the years, and I think just as an aside, what's great about the Seder is that any of you who've ever studied education, everything that the hippest, most creative educators talk about in the past couple of decades were laid out as rules by the rabbis in the Haggadah and in the various law codes 1,000 to 3,000, 1,000 to 2,000 years ago. It literally says, I'm breaking my pattern here. This is from the Mishnah. Okay, so this is like a 2,000-year-old, at least 1,500-year-old piece of text. The parent should teach according to the intelligence and personality of each child. Right? That somehow you as the leader are supposed to know your kids that intimately. One must make changes on this night so children will notice and ask, why is this night different? Things like that I love. There's a lot of little hands-on things, and my basic thing for getting kids involved is getting them involved early and doing as much of the prep work as possible, because I think that's where all the education comes in. You as the parent or the older uncle or the family friend, wait, why am I chopping up carpus? Why are my eyes, I guess your eyes aren't burning from chopping up carpus, but oh, the horseradish, right? I'm grating the horseradish. Why am I, why are my eyes burning? Well, that's a great opportunity for you to say, honey, because our ancestors cried a lot when we were slaves in Egypt. That's what the whole story is about here. That's what we're doing tonight. This food is here to do that. I think that's the great thing of the Haggadah and the ritual itself. By some point in the evening, every one of your senses is engaged at some point very strongly. Your eyes, your nose, your mouth, your ears, your bread, your brain, your spiritual level. So I jumped off here, but I should wrap up in a couple of minutes. So the last things, a couple last things. After you're done eating a lot of the ritual foods right before the dinner, there's a quote from Rabbi Gamliel saying, anyone who's not explained Pesach, Matzah, and Maror, they haven't fulfilled their obligation to do a Seder. And we talked about this in graduate school. Why these three items? Pesach, Matzah, Maror. And on one hand, you could come like, well, why really? Why are those the three? And what's the answer? And why? And for all of us, why should we try to understand why these three things are the most important? I think you can tell the whole story just of those three objects and pointing to them and talking about them. At the same time, I've flipped it a lot and said, what's missing? Are there three things that have been totally forgotten from this list? Or I expanded even more. And maybe this is not unlike what Judy was asking people to bring something that symbolized freedom or oppression. But I'd ask people to go around and say, are there three objects in your life that explain what kind of person you are, or three objects from your life that explain what kind of Jew you are and why? Could you explain? Or another way I've asked this question over time is, you can make it dramatic if you want and say that, we're leaving Germany in 1870 and we have just enough money to get three of us on the boat, but we only have room for each of us to take a small suitcase. You could be saying you're leaving Egypt back in under Pharaoh, but if you were about to leave for the next 10 years and you had to pack up three things so you could somehow maintain a Jewish existence on a desert island, what would those three things be that you would want to? And I've heard just amazing stories from people, right? A framed photo of my parents on their wedding. I need to know where I come from. That's or the Seder that my uncle carried in the Vietnam War, because I want to honor his memory and still be able to pray. All kinds of great things people come up with. And again, like Judy, we do a big study every year in the middle, and we usually ask someone, or we rotate, and we ask someone to put together to find an article or put together a few pieces of text exploring an issue in the Haggadah. In the narrative of the Exodus, and to lead a teaching on it, and to come up with a handful of discussion questions for people. And I would say too, for our seders, that discussion is the heart of the whole evening, and often could go on, if we don't cut it, it would go on for 45 minutes, an hour or 2 hours. So you have to make choices. So those are a lot of the things we do. Me personally, I go through the Haggadah. I try to make sure I'm going to say the traditional opening paragraph that most of us kind of know and that rings in our ears and in our memories, so people hear that and have that link to the past. And I always make sure that we say the bracha the Hatima, the closing blessing for each section. But in between, to me, everything's up for grabs and can be, you know, is a stage or a scene in a movie to use to explore and amplify the meanings and the tensions within the story itself. Thank you.
Great.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. I gotta say, the level of thought and information and diverse ideas got here tonight. Something all even close missing from my education. You know, we just did the Seder, and so I really appreciate all three of you, what you contributed here tonight. And thanks everybody for your comments and all that. We're not having, obviously, I think next Sunday, we're going to start the mysticism class back up. So maybe I'll see some of you there. Okay. Good night, all.
Oh, hang on.
Thank you.
Wait.
Thank you, it's wonderful.
I want to know if anybody in the audience has anything to add about a Haggadah they like or a tradition. So we had our 3 says, but if anybody wants to add, I would love to hear. Barb, Truett.
In Milwaukee, I worked at Marquette University where we had graduate students from India, China, and elsewhere. And a lot of, I'd say half of the faculty were not originally from the United States. And so I would always invite somebody, more than 1 or 2, frequently. My kids and I were the only Jews at the table. And so consider asking coworkers who have never been to a Seder.
Thanks. That's great.
I completely agree. I would only add to Barb's. I always have this image in my head of Adina's maid of honor, very Catholic maid of honor, came with her boyfriend, and they drove from New York City, and they arrived like about 3 minutes late for the Seder, which was fine. We were just worried about them. And then like they sat there for the next 4 hours being immersed in the Holocaust and Jewish history. So I would say give your guests a heads up as to what they're getting into. Like, I know, like if you know, before a bar mitzvah, like one of my friends came up to me and had no clue how long the bar mitzvah was going to be. It's used to Catholic mass, which you can be out of there in like 35 minutes, you know, we have like 3-hour ceremonies, right? When our kids come of age. So I think it's good if you have or even your marginal Jewish friends who may not have been in these, to say, hey, we're not gonna eat till like 9:30, babe, and you're not leaving till 11:30, unless I give you permission, you know. So, but just let people know what they're in for.
Great. Leah, I think your hand was up.
I lead a Seder every year for family and extended family. And I try to make it nice. It's very, very far from what the presenters talk today. It's far simpler, but I put a lot of effort into making it into a nice Seder and talk about the history of the Seder. And at the same time, I am deeply aware that it is more of a tradition than it is history. The Egyptians kept very good records of absolutely everything. There is no mention in any Egyptian records of Hebrews ever being in the land of Egypt. They mention a whole lot of other people, other groups of people that were there, but not Hebrews. So the Exodus and our stay in Egypt might have never happened. But the funny thing is that I still put so much effort and so much thought into having a nice Seder.
Judy? No, can't hear. Oh, you had it. You had it.
I'm sorry, along those lines, one of our first seders, the question, and this one I did not send out in advance, was what if it never happened? And what I did was I had people read The Midnight Riot of Paul Revere, the poem. That never happened either.
Right.
But still, is it worth learning that poem? Do we teach it to kids in school? Is that whole Midnight Ride mythology important to us as Americans, even if we know it's a story? Well, yes, it is. It really is. So we read that at the Seder, and then we said, well, maybe this is kind of the same thing. Doesn't matter if this story never happened. It's our story. And what is a story? A story is the narrative you tell to make sense of what you have, or to make sense of the world, or to explain your position in the world. And that's what it's. So we got there in a very roundabout way. You know, but it's kind of the same thing that you're saying, Leah. In the end, everybody agrees it doesn't matter if the story never happened. It is still our culture.
It's still our tradition.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Necessary fiction. It's a necessary
I
fiction.
just have a little comment though, because there are these columns of writing, of Egyptian writing, that do talk about that some of the big, I don't know if they were pyramids or some big things that were built in Egypt were partly built by Hebrews who had been captured from like maybe 2 Israeli cities. It's in the hieroglyphics, I believe. So
I was saying no.
oh, okay, but all I can say is I saw it on PBS. So
I'm pretty sure that they were built like at 2 different timelines, is what I've
put
heard.
it in the timeline, but anyhow.
Built by slaves.
Right.
Actually, if you go to Egypt, they will tell you that they weren't really built by slaves. They were built in the off season, and they were like WPA projects because farmers could only work when after the Nile flooded. It was a limited farming season, and that there are records, and Egyptians did keep records of food stores that were brought in, and payments that were made. Now, I don't know, but I know that that's what they tell you when you go see the pyramids and the tombs in the Valley of the Kings.
I'd like to change the subject for a second.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to change the subject for a second. There's this Haggadah here. It's called the Joyous Haggadah.
Yes.
Ah,
I used
And-
that when my kids were little.
Did you? Yeah, well, I got like 5 kids at my Seder, so I thought I had something. And it is, it's kind of like a graphic novel. It has real things. And I think, I can't say for sure, but I think that the little kids paid more attention and were quieter because they could see the pictures and stuff. So that was a good one. And I'm confused because I want to use that and I want to use the ecological
Right.
Seder as well. So we'll see.
Compromise and do
you can
both.
go back and forth.
I could do that. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Real quick, I was going to say that, and I didn't, but like what I found success. I mean, I think you have to, if you're going to have a lot of kids. I mean, most of us, I'm looking out here, and I know you guys, what stage of life you're in, aren't parents of young kids anymore. Though many of us are probably grandparents. I think you have to make choices. Like you like if you're going to really want to involve the kids, you have to do a kids Seder, at least, or for the first like hour, and go through all the major points that you want to make sure they eat all the food and they get to throw, bugs around for the plagues, things like that. There's all kinds of hands-on
And
stuff.
maybe do the onion thing.
Right. Beat each other, right. Like slave drivers with the onions, right. Jeff and Deb used to have people put backpacks on and schlep up and down their block in the middle of the meal, and when they were hungry before they could come back. all kinds of things that, there's all kinds of skits out there and pantomimes, things like that. And that can be fun. A lot of parents or a lot of adults don't like that stuff, right? And I mean, what we found successful was we kind of front loaded things for the kids, got them involved around some of the opening portions, then let them go play and have some snacks while the adults discussed serious issues of spirituality and politics. And then when it came back to eat all of the symbolic food, bring the kids back in and go through the kinds of hands-on learning of those items, and then have dinner, and then again let the kids go play. And the whole end of the Seder it's pretty, I won't go into, but it can be very problematic. It can be very sad unless you really bring things in that are uplifting, and let them go until the end, and that's my advice.
Good. Maxine, I am sure you have something to share. I can't imagine. What are your seders like? I'm just curious. Oh, you're muted. You're muted. Oh, there you
Now
are.
you're good.
Our studies have evolved as the family has grown and changed and all that kind of stuff. When the kids were younger and in their teen years and that kind of stuff, we had we went pretty traditionally. And then when we joined the Reconstructionist synagogue, we started using that Haggadah and started discussions and that kind of thing. And it was very, very successful. But then my daughter Ariel had children, and she started doing exactly what we were just discussing, which is to have a child Seder first. And then the kids then would exit left until they were brought back at appropriate times, and the adults would take over. It's a very effective tool. There's no question about that. But I do want to say that I've had the distinct pleasure of getting an opportunity to take a look at the various Haggadot that Judy has put together, and the amazing creativity and the fact that she's so good at engaging the participants and the way that she is, there's a lot of there are many lessons to be learned from that particular perspective. And each of the three presenters certainly have looked at that. I just was very taken aback, and just, you go into her closet and there's a container for every year of her Passover Haggadot. And they go, for a long, long time, many, many years. And each of them, as she indicated, is different. And I've taken ideas from that, and it's been helpful, for the participants at the Sederim that I've attended. Now, my daughter Elise actually is the one that hosts the Seders at this point. We moved to a place where I don't accommodate as many people as I did before. And frankly, my keches isn't as great as it was. So it's wonderful to have somebody to lean on in that regard. And she's also very creative too. So the kids get a lot out of it, and we all learn something new. Her in-laws join us every year. They are not Jewish. And just marvel at the opportunity to have a place at the table. So we come in with a tremendous number of perspectives, during the course of discussions, and it is gratifying in every way possible. Thank you.
Great.
Anybody else?
Just want to have a final thought as we round.
Either Mimi or Phyllis or
One question.
Paula.
I have a question for Mark.
Okay.
Mark, the questions that you pose to your guests are very creative. They are also very hard. Do people respond?
Usually, yeah. Usually I don't usually ask the hardest stuff until well into the Seder. But it's usually people who I know and who I know are going to be comfortable talking about these things. But you're right. I do this stuff that kind of probes at psychology, but I'm not a therapist. I'm just married to one. So, it can be somewhat dangerous, but.
Yeah, I thought that Adina was creating this and just telling you. Some of them were very psychological.
No, I think it was just
Or
a perfect
kids.
melding,
Or
a
kids
perfect
one.
melding of Jewish knowledge and psychological kind of perspective.
Jungian.
There's that, which is why I think we should always read, pour out your wrath on our enemies and destroy them, because we all have that in us and we all feel it sometimes. And I think it's good that the ritual, particularly around these questions, brings that up and makes that manifest. But you got to be careful too how you do it. And it can, and obviously it can backfire, or it can really turn into Jewish xenophobia and triumphalism, things like that.
Know your audience.
Exactly, I was gonna say.
Yeah.
Know your audience.
I have
Judy,
one
did-
question, one more quick question. Judy,
Oh.
how many people were at the protest?
Oh.
You're muted.
Still muted.
And Mimi had,
There you go.
So it
Oh.
was really, oh yeah, so this is where we worked right before.
Yeah.
Um, there were a few hundred, there were like 3 different protests outside where, I don't know how to pronounce his name, Schmotrich
Yeah.
was at this Israel bond dinner tonight. So this one was organized by J Street, and they had a few hundred people there. And then there was a Palestinian group, which the place was swarming with police and security. And the Palestinians were around the corner on another side. And then there was another group that had signs that say, no peace with occupation. And they were a separate group, but the J Street group was the biggest.
And where was this?
It was at the Hyatt here, the Park Hyatt in Washington, about on 8th and between 10th and 11th. And we live on M between 10th and 11th. So we walked down, and interesting, I belonged to J Street, but I didn't hear about it from them. I heard about it from a friend who belongs to Temple Micah, which is a synagogue here. And they had sent out a notice to their people that there was going to be this demonstration against the Israeli bond dinner.
Wow.
And
I wish we had organized stuff like that here in Cleveland.
well, he was here, and so it was here, and it was raining, and it was
Oh.
cold, and they still had hundreds of people.
wow.
Wonderful.
Mimi had her hand up, so
I
maybe.
I don't think there's time to answer my question during this session, but if anyone wants to reach out to me, like afterward by email or phone or text, this is my question. I cannot host my whole family at my house because I have cats and a number of our extended family are allergic. So we're always doing the Seder at other people's houses, where usually the guy who's the man of the house is sort of leading. And we have a very beautiful old Haggadah that we use with beautiful illustrations, but it's getting pretty boring. It's like the same thing every year, then trying to speed through it. And so I would welcome anyone's suggestions about how to bring up the idea of changing things around nicely to other people, because they're the hosts and they're doing all the work of hosting. I'm just showing up with, maybe a dish. So anyhow, if you feel moved to reach out to me afterward, I would be grateful. Thank you. And I loved everything everybody said. It was very inspiring to me. Thank you.
All right, it's 9 o'clock. I know we could go further, but I think we covered the waterfront enough tonight. It's been terrific.
Nice discussions.
Thank you. I
Right,
appreciate all
great.
the work you guys put in.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
My pleasure.
Okay, thanks. I'll see you all.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.